Hey folks, welcome back to the channel, your home for all content Lord of the Rings home. It's been a minute. It's been a minute since I both made a video and probably since I should have published this video. This is going to be a glyph guide, glyph basics sort of video. We've had glyphs out for like a month now, but I wanted to kind of get a better handle on the system, get some more data on particular questions I had so that I could present that to you. Then the holidays came around. I went home to go see my family. To go see my mom, and so that's kind of delayed this video a little bit. I hope you had a good Christmas and holidays, and I hope you have a good New Year's, which should be coming up here, right? With that in mind, the structure of this particular video is I'm going to go through some of the glyph basic stuff. One, just so that, again, we have on a glyph guide video, it's all kind of in one place. But also, I think there's a few things that are still confusing a number of people, and there's maybe some tips and tricks in there that I think will make things a little bit easier for some people if you haven't seen them before. And then we're going to kind of do a little bit of a dive into talking about primaries, secondaries, the different sets, how good I think they are, whatnot. And then we'll be talking about arena and upgrading at the end there. With that in mind, I do want to say, I think most of my commentary outside of the arena section is going to be with raids in mind. So pretty much everything that I'm talking about is going to be with the raids in mind. There's a little bit of stuff that applies to both, right? But I think I'll cover all of the arena stuff in the arena section. I'm going to put timestamps down below so you can kind of skip to whatever section you want. But let's start off with some of the basics. So if I just go to my collection here, let's bring up Arwen. And then I am going to probably hide my camera because there's not really a good place to put it to show you what I want to, everything that I want to show you here. So for the time being, let me just turn my camera off. Okay, so the green numbers here are basically what gets added from your glyphs to your stats, the white numbers being your base stats. This is how much your glyphs are basically contributing to them, right? Let me switch this to default sorting. We'll cover sorting in a little bit here. And then you have these top three. These top three are always going to have the same primary stat: HP, damage, armor. And then the bottom three are where you have that kind of customizability, the different options. So this one you get HP, armor, damage, and focus. HP, middle one is HP, armor, damage, resistance, and then the last one is any of them. So it could be HP, armor, damage, resistance, focus. So you can have a maximum of 2 focus primaries or a maximum of 2 resistance primaries. We're going to cover the primaries there in a little bit. Some of the stuff that I like to do to kind of navigate around, obviously it opens with pretty much all of them up here like this. So if I want to navigate to a set quicker, I just collapse them all, go to the set I want, drag that down. Okay, this little heart shield type thing. The way it's implemented right now, you can't favorite certain glyphs or save certain glyphs for a certain character. So like, if I really like this glyph for Arwen, I can't just be like, oh, I'm going to save this glyph for Arwen in case I need to swap things around for maybe a different chapter of the raid. You can't do that. Instead, you can only favorite sets at the moment. This makes swapping between different glyphs actually really cumbersome and annoying. And so I've basically just decided I'm not going to switch glyphs out for different raid chapters. It's too annoying to get back to how I wanted things previously for me to do that. But if you're doing a comparison between glyphs, you can kind of see, let's see if I can find a good example here. Yeah. When you've got your glyph selected here, right? That's the glyph you have on. And then the glyph down in the bottom right is where you are, a glyph you're having comparison with. If you look at the top, you can see if it's highlighted in red, that means it's not in the other glyph. If it's highlighted in green here, down in the glyph that you would be adding to your character, that means that is a stat that is not currently on the equipped glyph. If it's not highlighted, so if it's just white, but the number is green or red, that tells you that, yes, the equipped glyph that you're comparing this current glyph to does have that stat. And this one, let's say armor, 1.9%, 1.96%, that is higher than the armor on this particular glyph up here of 1.62%. Damage is lower at 1.24% because the damage here is at 2.53%. So that just kind of gives you a little bit of a taste. For glyph comparison, I actually like the way that this is laid out. I think it's easy to sort of read the stats this way. I do like that. This button here obviously tells you whether the glyphs are equipped or not. I almost have it always unchecked. In terms of how many glyphs you can have, I think there's a little bit of a visual bug up here. It counts all of the glyphs that your characters have equipped, but each time you unlock a character, I believe it's at unlock, you get another X amount of glyphs that you can have in your glyph inventory. But I don't think it's quite right. I think it's like off by a little bit. I'm not entirely sure. But this basically tells you that particular thing. And then you can't do filtering, but you can do sorting. So default is just tells you, it just lists the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 glyphs that just kind of puts them in order there by level within that particular slot. And then level here, and then health through resistance. Those are the primaries that it sorts. And then starting at percent health all the way down to block chance here, that basically is sorting by the secondaries. And that'll sort it across the different glyph glyph slots. So I do percent health, right? This is just a percent health in the Bloodlust set for all of the glyph slots. So this is slot 5. This is slot 4. It's kind of doing that. I think that's pretty basic stuff, right? So I like to often, if I'm putting new glyphs on a character or swapping things out, I often sort by secondaries. And then within my secondaries, I'll have this, highlighted here, and I can swap between them, especially down in these bottom 3 ones. I can be like, okay, yes, these have the secondaries I want, but does it have the primary I want? And just checking the primary with the secondaries that I want already on it, I know that that's a little bit faster for me. In terms of the default sorting, I don't actually, outside of, like, if they're all level 5, I actually don't know how it default sorts, to be honest with you. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Oh yeah, I just triggered the bug. I'll talk about that in a second. Because, like, often if I'm upgrading or just selling my level 5 glyphs, so, like, if I upgrade to level 5, or if I'm just looking at my level 5 glyphs that I already have and deciding whether I want to keep it or not, and I sell it, it will, like, change the order. It doesn't preserve the order that it was previously in. It's not like it took this glyph out and then this one goes here. Sometimes it completely rearranges the order of the glyphs, which is very frustrating for continuously checking which glyphs I want to have, which glyphs I want to keep and which glyphs I want to sell. On top of the fact that you can only sell one glyph at a time at the moment, and that is a very, very cumbersome burden. That sort of adds on top of the, I don't know how to, what's the adjective? I don't know. It adds on top of it. It makes it more cumbersome. 2 times cumbersome. Anyway, this is also sometimes a visual glitch that you end up happening here, where if I can click on these glyphs, but it's not showing anything on the right here. The way you deal with this, you just click on the glyph that you have selected on your character. It brings back up the stats back up, and then you can click on a glyph again and it'll show you the comparison. Sometimes that happens. I don't know why. In terms of where to get glyphs, well, the major sets, which you need 4 of to activate the effect, minor sets, which you need 2 of to activate the effect. All of the major sets can be found on hard nodes on normal energy. I still don't feel too great about that, to be honest with you. I think my main account, which obviously spends on the game, I get a good amount of glyphs. My free-to-pay account, I feel like it's a little bit lacking in terms of the amount of glyphs I get, and I do feel like it's a much harder choice to choose between that and gear, so I still would prefer it to be a different energy, but alas, that's how it is right now. Anyway, major sets are on hard nodes, minor sets are on regular nodes. You don't have to memorize where they're at because you can just come in here, find the set you want, click the magnifying glass. Then you scroll past the 12 packs that are all the same pack for some reason. And then you can, find which hard node you want. Often when I'm farming for glyphs or when I'm farming for gear, I will check to see, okay, do I need these? Do I need these? And I'll farm those first. That's especially true for the minor sets. They reduce the amount of gear that you basically get from 2 to 1 when they added glyphs. So now you get glyphs, and then you also get 1 piece of gear instead of 2 pieces of gear, right? So even if I am not farming a particular glyph set and I'm farming gear, let's say, I will still look to see if any of the nodes that I can farm have glyphs on them. There's a good example with the Life Stealer glyph. a case that I just want to point out. I don't think you should be using this set because right now it is not worthy of being used. It's bad. But the Lifestealer set has like some pretty decent gear on it actually, right? Especially these tokens. And so if I'm farming tokens, I will always farm the Lifestealer set. And the reason I'm doing that, or this node that has the Lifestealer set on it, even though I don't use Lifestealer, and that's just because I can get a bunch of Lifestealer stuff, glyphs, and then basically sell them for 200 a pop. And that is just a little bit of extra gold bonus, right? Okay, so let's talk about upgrading. Let me find a level 1 glyph real quick. Here we go. Hit upgrade. You get this reveal all stats button down here. So at level 5, you get to reveal all the secondary stats in each of these. And so the way it works is at level 2, you're going to reveal a secondary stat, 3 secondary stat, 4 secondary stat, 5 a secondary stat. That's always the way it's going to be. You don't have a chance to get more of this level 2 secondary stat in here. I think I could turn my camera on back for a second here. Yeah, there we go. Right, so if I get to level 3, I don't get a second chance to roll into this secondary stat here. It's always going to reveal all of these secondary stats first. This is nice. It's always 5,300. I am going to highly recommend that you do this quite often. It's not as bad of a gold sink as I thought. It's a little bit of a gold sink, but the other things in the game are much bigger gold sinks. I don't think this has had a massive, massive impact on my gold income. Let's do it. Reveal all stats. And then I think I'm going to make a whole separate video about this particular sort of strategy, but depending on whether I'm on my main account or my free-to-play account, and depending on the particular set, I will either sell or keep a glyph that I just upgraded kind of based on this criteria. So often what it is I will look to see if 3 of the secondary stats are further along on the right side. They've got most of this bar filled up. I'm okay with 1 of the stats not being as good, either in the middle or on the low end, but I want at least 3 on the high end. On my free-to-play account, if I just don't have too many glyphs of that particular set, then, you know, I can be okay with basically keeping a glyph that just has 2 of the secondary stats over on the right end here. And so the way this works, right, is it tells you the secondary stat, and then it tells you down in this yellow text here exactly sort of what the range is for this particular stat, what you can roll. So 0.75 would be the furthest to the left, 1.5% would be the furthest to the right. And it goes in increments of 0.01 for all of these. However, the ranges obviously differ. So, right, so we have 0.5 to 1% for block mitigation, but 0.75 to 1.5% for damage. But you can still get 0.099 for damage, and you can still get 0.099 for block mitigation. So still that granularity of always 0.01. So the reason I like to kind of have 3 of the stats be further along on the right here is just because if I am going to spend money on upgrading this further, and importantly, if I'm going to continue to spend scrolls on this particular glyph, I just want it to be in a good place. Sometimes if it looks close, like if I have 4 that are kind of maybe towards the middle and not towards the right, I will just look at the stats and be like, oh, this is a great combination of stats. I should probably just keep that. But that's kind of my rule of thumb for whether I keep it or upgrade it, or sell it rather. I'm going to do a whole section later on kind of estimating how often you're going to be able to upgrade these. I think getting to level 5 is totally fine. With that in mind, I do think if you're like starting to bring a team up to use in raids, right? You're working on your 4th or your 5th raid team or whatever. Making sure that the characters get to gear level 5 is very important, right? Because this is tied to gear levels, so you want to be able to get to gear level 5 because then you get access to all the secondary stats. I think it's just like a sort of good stopping point for 1, upgrading glyphs, and because you don't have to use any scrolls, but 2, just getting your characters to that gear level so you can take full advantage of that. If you're putting level 5 glyphs on a gear 4 character, right, then that lowers the amount of primary stats they have access to. You still get access to all the secondary stats, but primary stats are a lot, you know, they get reduced. After glyph level 5, it requires scrolls to upgrade. I don't have any right now. You can only get scrolls from raids. Again, I'm going to talk about that more in depth in a later section of the video. However, something I do want to mention here is kind of how the mechanics of that work. 5 to 6, no secondary upgrades, but you do get primary upgrades. Every time you upgrade your glyph, you're getting primary stat upgrades. 6 to 7, 7 to 8, 8 to 9, 9 to 10, you're going to get additional rolls on your secondaries. Now that is different. It's different in how it works compared to when you initially unlock the 4 secondaries. What it does not do, which I think has confused some people, it does not then let you do, you're not going to then roll into damage, block mitigation, speed, HP again. Every time you go up a glyph level where you can upgrade, you have a chance of getting any of these secondaries equally. So if I go 6 to 7, I could roll damage, I could roll speed, I could roll HP, and by the time you get to 10, you could have it so that you did speed, 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 and you've only rolled into speed. This is why when they released one of those tables after the dev glyph Q&A, where it was basically like, what is the max stat you could get per glyph? So if you got all max speed, right, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, 1.5, that would be 7 speed on one particular glyph. Also importantly, how this does not work is you do not re-roll what these stats are. I know that is something that has, I guess, been introduced recently in Swigo, or at least since I stopped playing. Not the case here. That may come later down the line, but that was years and years and years after they introduced mods in Swigo. I don't think we're going to see that for a little while. So again, another reason why I kind of want to start in a good place when I am upgrading my glyphs is just because you're not going to, in the foreseeable future, I don't see them adding a mechanic where we're able to re-roll these. Could be wrong. Maybe not. So outside of using their normal energy to get glyphs, there are a couple other ways to get glyphs. Ooh, 100 energy. I will take that. Also, this is very nice. I'll talk about that in a sort of year-end roundup. It's nice. Still a band-aid, but nice. A few other places you can get glyphs. You can get glyphs from the bonus chest that you get every 4 hours, right? Mystery glyph down here. It can be levels 1, 3, or 5. This is great. I don't think it's a great source of glyphs, but it's nice. It's free stuff. I'm not going to complain about it. The other place that you can get glyphs, which I think is worth mentioning and talking about, so outside of normal energy and the bonus chest, is in the main store here. These, I think, are worth buying. They're always level 5, and you can either get 2 times like that last stand, or 1 times like this armor piercer here. And they're relatively cheap. They're not so cheap that you should buy. You can't like buy them and then resell them for more gold. So I think 2 is like 4,300 gold or something like that. And then if you sold them, you would get like 40, 60 gold. So you would lose 200 and something gold. But basically, if you are interested in a particular set and you're like, oh, I use these sets all the time, I think these are definitely worth buying. One last kind of note about glyphs. I think that sort of summarizes a lot of the basic stuff, at least basic stuff that I think people haven't quite realized, or that there's been some confusion about, I should say. I guess I'll leave it with a few notes. The primaries are always going to give you more stats than the secondaries. What I mean by that is, like, if you have a primary stat, one of the primary stats you have access to, so HP, damage, armor, focus, resistance. Yeah, so of those stats, adding a glyph with that primary is always going to, it seems to always do more, give you more stats than just trying to do, like, if you were to replace it with secondaries. So let me give you an example. Let's say I want to replace this damage glyph, which you can't see. Let's say I want to replace this damage glyph with a focus glyph. Can I make up the damage by just focusing on damage as a secondary in the other stats? It's really, it's pretty hard, actually. So the best way to get any of those 5 primary stats is just to add one of those primary stats. Second thing I want to say is, I think there's this notion that people they just want to, like, something I've noticed is basically people just want to, like, be told what is the best glyph for a particular character. And I think the way they've designed it and their intention as well is such that it kind of depends. And we're going to talk about, like, what I think the best practices are, and obviously some guidelines and whatnot. And I'm going to show you some spreadsheets because, of course, but it does kind of depend on how you play that particular character. They don't have cookie cutter teams, right? We've got these 3-man kernel teams. There's a lot of mix and matching in the raid. And so it really depends on what you use that character for and in the raid, how you use them. That being said, a lot of people have asked what I'm using for particular glyphs. So again, keeping in mind that I don't think there's like a best in slot for every character that needs to be, can be gamed out. I am going to post a link down below to a spreadsheet that has what my current glyphs on the characters I use are. So it's mostly characters. I can actually switch to that right now. So here it is. So it's basically the characters I use in raids at the moment. It tells you the character, the faction, just so that it's a little bit maybe easier to find. The sets that I'm using, the primaries, this is just the bottom 3 primaries, right? Because the other ones don't change. And then what I tried to focus on for secondaries, and then some notes around some stuff. Again, this is not something you should just strictly follow. This is not like a hard guide. It's just what I'm kind of doing or working on or testing out at the moment. I'll try and keep this regularly updated, but I'll post a link to that both down below, and then I'll make it a pinned comment in the Glyph channel in my Discord. So, at the very least, when people go, what are you putting on your elves? I can just be like, look at the spreadsheet. That is what is on my elves at the moment. Okay, let's talk about primaries. First thing I want to talk about is HP versus armor. All right, another spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets. HP versus armor. For healers, I think the best case is you basically just run HP as much as you can. On Elrond, I run 1 focus because I want to make sure his slows land, but like for Naramiri, it's 3 HP. Just because their heals are obviously based off their max HP, I want to make sure that they are healing as much as possible. Now, for tanks, do you do HP or do you do armor? That is a question I have had for myself. This is a spreadsheet I will also leave a link to down below. This is not my spreadsheet. This is from Rakos Nasik. I think I am probably butchering that name, but it is something that they came up with. I'll lead you through the spreadsheet in a second here. This is basically based off of work, the armor equation, which is basically, from my understanding, been single-handedly sort of derived by somebody named Yari. A lot of this was brought to my attention, or I've figured out I've seen a lot of this stuff through Jay Randall. So shout out to those 3 people in particular, so that we can kind of get a better understanding of how armor works, and then we can make a decision about armor versus HP. So let's talk about this spreadsheet. Basically, for some amount of armor, you get some amount of reduction in incoming damage, right? That's what this sort of left side here tells you. Okay, at 100 armor, I'm reducing the incoming damage by 5.26%. This person's European, and so there's commas instead of decimal points, but that's pretty easy to switch in your head, or get used to, rather. What's interesting about this, right, is that the more armor you add, the less damage reduction you get, right? So, what does that mean? You can look at this graph, and that it kind of tells you a similar story. As I continue to add armor here, which is on the x-axis, you get less damage reduction over time. That's an interesting sort of story. So, if you have a tank, should you be adding HP or armor? And the answer is, it depends, which I know people love to hear. Let's take Eladin, for example. What did I do with my Eladin? I basically put 3 armor primaries on my Eladin. That gave him about 1,000 armor, and it took him from about 2,000-ish armor to about 3,000-ish armor. I feel personally that after about 3,000 armor, it's not worth the returns to continue pumping him with more armor. So, at some point, if I continue to upgrade my glyphs on him, I might swap out one of my armor for HP. That way I can stick it around about 3,000-ish armor. This might change with additional glyph levels. It might change with additional player levels, because the amount of damage reduction you get does depend on the defender's level. So this is all based off of level 60 characters at the moment here, as you can see in this equation up here. So that math might change at level 65, maybe this is 3,000 number that I've arbitrarily set. It's really arbitrary. Will then shift at higher levels. But level 60, that's kind of where I'm putting it. I don't feel like going up to, 4,000 becomes worth it, right? Because at 3,000, let's see, it's about 62% armor reduction, and at about 4,000, it's about 69%, armor reduction, or damage reduction. So I don't feel like that is worth it. The interesting thing that Rakos did here, that I think is a good way to think about armor, is essentially, because it's reducing incoming damage, it is effectively giving you additional HP. So he's done that for 30k HP here and for 40k HP here. Depending on how much HP you have and how much armor you have, how much HP is that armor basically giving you? If you have more HP, the armor essentially gives you more effective HP, if that makes sense, right? Because you have just more health that you are essentially being able to eat into. So HP and armor are actually really complementary in that sense. So the reason I stop at about 3,000 armor again for Elodin is, again, because I don't think like pushing up past that is going to, doesn't give him much more damage reduction. But also I don't want to go much lower than that because I want to make sure that he is able to get healed by Elrond. Because Elrond is the one doing the healing for him on that Rivendell team, I want to make sure that he is able to essentially get healed. If you just do HP, he's going to be taking bigger hits because he doesn't have armor to reduce the damage. And then you have to ask yourself, okay, well, is Elrond going to be able to keep up by healing all that health? So if I go look at Elrond here, with glyphs, I have him at about 46,000 HP. And for Elodin here, I have about 49,000 HP, right? So if I instead did a bunch of health primaries and really jacked this number up, Elodin would, one, be getting hit more, but then Elrond would kind of be struggling to heal up the same amount each time. That percentage, at least percentage-wise. He's healing the same amount, but healing up the same percentage of Elodin's health. It would be harder to do that. So I think there is actually a good balance to be had here, which transitions me into talking about tanks like Halberad and Bomber even, really. These are, tanks that have a lot of health, but not a lot of HP, or not a lot of armor. Actually, let's go look at Halberad. Where is he? Maybe we can just look at Bomber. I put armor on Bomber, so can you see that? Yeah, you should be able to see that. Okay, so normally this is 6-star Bomber, so he's not 7 stars, but I think my Halberad's also 6 stars. Doesn't have a lot of armor. Is that like 600 to 800, I think, somewhere in there? Bomber before glyphs has 727 armor, right? Not a lot. Has a lot of health though. So what I think you should do in these cases, I actually do think you should be rounding up, kind of rounding them out as a whole. Don't spec too much into one stat when it comes to HP versus armor, because what I found was essentially like if I just went all HP, yes, Bomber has a lot of HP, but he was still dying faster because he was just taking so much more damage. So I think a good place to be is like, especially for tanks, actually most characters, you're going to obviously get the most returns in this 0 to 1,000 armor area. And one level 5 glyph is 186 armor. And so for somebody like Bomber, somebody like Halberad, I think it's worth them having 1 or 2 armor glyphs. You do get one in the top in slot 3, but having an additional one in 4 to 6, I think is a good idea. It kind of pushes you over this 1,000 armor limit here. And obviously anything more than that, you're going to get less of a damage reduction. But I think just getting over that 1,000 line is pretty good. And then for other tanks, I think stopping at about 3,000 seems pretty good to me. So this 1,000 to 3,000 area seems pretty decent for tanks, depending on the tank, depending on the team, right? How are they getting healed? It's something you should just be thinking about. Okay, so that's my whole armor versus HP spiel. Healers, just go full HP or focus if you need a little bit like Elrond. Tanks, you kind of, I think, gotta do a little bit of a balancing act and think about how you're playing them and then what their starting stats are. And do you need to round them out, or do you need to like stop after a certain point and, you know, just focus on some other things? You know, maybe if I feel like my Eladin has enough HP and enough armor, maybe I'll do, I think I even have a focus primary on him actually, just to make sure I'm landing that weaken when he has counterattack on him or when he is attacking with his basic. Got to think about those things. Okay, let's talk about focus versus resistance. Let me switch back to... Bomber's a good example, but we're going to swap to Thorin. So I'm going to cover the bottom right hand of the screen here, because I don't think it's... Oh, it does matter, actually. Put me right there, right awkwardly in the top. So, focus versus resistance. Should you go focus or should you go resistance? Like I said, I think I just don't want to swap out glyphs for different raid chapters. I also feel like I don't get enough scrolls on either of my accounts to really justify doing a whole nother set at the moment just for one particular chapter. Maybe that'll be something down the line, and maybe if they add more quality of life stuff for glyph management, then I could do that, but not at the moment. That being said, should you go focus or should you go resistance? Well, my Thorin is 5 stars, and a big part of his kit revolves around landing marked. So, I want to guarantee that that happens. I've decided to go 2 focus glyphs. It's basically as simple as that. Once he gets to 7 star, if I feel like his focus is still pretty good place, then I will take off one of these focus glyphs and probably go damage. Basically, does it feel like I'm landing my Banes enough for the situations in which I'm using them? If not, I add a focus glyph. If it does, I can maybe play around with taking off a focus glyph and seeing whether that works or not. Focus versus resistance. I've seen people with resistance glyphs go into difficulty 4 in chapter 4 and do quite well there. I think that is a strategy that works decently well with like teams that aren't applying Banes. So I think it works pretty well with like Rivendell. They apply some Banes, but I think a majority of them can get away with just having that sort of resistance on them and then resisting the debuffs from the Balrog. That means that you can get your boons extended because of Elrond's leadership, right? And you're getting fortitude as well, so that kind of adds on top of each other. Do I think resistance glyphs are a good idea for chapter 3? Not really. I don't think that's what you should be focusing on for chapter 3. I haven't seen it work super well. Like, nobody's going into difficulty 5 in chapter 3. I think you're going to have more success in chapter 3 trying to play to the mechanics of the chapter. So being able to have people toss around taunt or provoke, or having cleanses. I think that is a better option. Additionally, I'm sure you all have seen, or if you haven't, you should go watch it. There's a strategy where you can use Bloodlust, 3 times Bloodlust, right? And then essentially cheese your way to 900k points in just difficulty 3. In chapter 3. But pushing up to difficulty 4 and 5, I think you're going to have more success just kind of beefing up the primary stats of your characters, but still focusing on the mechanics of the chapter as opposed to just hoping your resistance glyphs take care of things for you. That being said, I do think there's like a little bit of a play style. How do you want to play the game? In my case, I want to play the game where I'm able to land Banes on the character, on the raid, whatever. Whatever the chapter of the raid I'm in. That's how I would prefer to play the game. If you want to prefer to play the game where you're just like banking on resisting debuffs in the raid, that's totally fine, up to you. I do think there's probably a little bit of value of having resistance glyphs on characters for like PvP defense. So like your arena defense might be good. And I think eventually, you know, when we get multi-squad PvP, if you have a team that's like always on defense, I think then talking about resistance there is going to be a good call as well. Going to depend on the team, but that's kind of how I've been viewing focus versus resistance. It is very much the case where it feels like, okay, if I need more focus, I throw on a focus glyph. If I need less focus, I will take one off, or if, you know, that whole situation. It does feel like they add significant amount of stats that gets over a hurdle. I've seen some things where it's like, for chapter 2, the cave troll, right? how much focus do you need? I don't think we completely know exactly what those numbers are. It's something I want to try and figure out. I figured out the armor numbers. Difficulty 3, it's about 3,053 armor for the cave troll before he goes into enrage, obviously. And then it's like, I'm forgetting off the top of my head. It's either 3,100 or 3,300. I want to say it's 3,100 for difficulties 4 and 5. But I think his resistance changes quite a bit between difficulties 3, 4, and 5. It goes up each time as opposed to the armor, which doesn't change between 4 and 5. So we're going to work on sort of sorting that out, but that just takes a lot of time and data collection. But I did see people in difficulty 5 who were getting 2 mil with goblins. You know, they had like 5,000 focus on some of their goblins. And even then, I guess, weren't landing Banes as much as they would like. So you need a lot of it if you're going to do the very, very upper echelons of raid content. That's just kind of a guideline there. I think having like 3,300 to 3,500 seems to be a good place for doing difficulty 4. And that's easier to accomplish with leaderships like Thorin or sharing passives like with the Haradrim. I think you can get to that number a lot easier. But those are just some ballparks. Don't take those as fact if you're thinking about Chapter 2 specifically. Okay, let's talk about damage. This one is a no-brainer. If you have a DPS, you put on damage. That's basically all I have to say about that. Damage is great. It works really well. And I think, let's go look at my Elra here. Who I don't think is actually completely kitted out for damage, but we'll see. Damage. Oh, he's got 3 times damage. He is. So what is he at? So he only has... He's doing okay. So he has, what, 4,200 damage, I think, total? This obviously gets amplified quite a bit. Damage, yeah, 4,200 damage. I could do math. That's a pretty good number. Getting up to 5,000, I think he would hit really, really hard. But 4,200 is nothing to sneeze at. Getting over 1,000 damage from glyphs is, I think, really good for damage dealers. That's basically all I have to say about damage dealer primaries. Let's talk about secondaries. Okay, I'm gonna start with speed. Basically the way I feel about speed is that in the raids, I'm not sure how much it matters. I think you could do some speed tuning to essentially make sure you go before the, like, between the Shadowseer and the Skull Crusher for Chapter 1, difficulty 3. But they either have more turn meter, like they start off with turn meter, or they're faster in difficulty 4 and 5 for chapters 1 and 3, and actually just in all the chapters, right? So I'm just not so sure that speed is the way to go. I do feel like it's basically not become a speed meta. I think for Arena, it does have a place. I do think it's valuable in Arena and that you can do speed and change turn order, especially with this Elrond meta, still having this like stall meta and making sure that your Elrond goes and then your Arwen can cleanse once their Elrond goes. In that sense, you actually kind of don't want speed on Arwen, right? So I think there's a place for it there, but overall, I really don't feel like speed is king. At least from my own experience. I don't know. You all let me know if you still really focus on speed. I haven't been. It's always nice when a glyph has it and I'll throw it on there. But other than that, I don't put it on there. But I do think there is a caveat that I want to mention here. It's definitely worth talking about. I really think you should avoid putting speed on any of the large characters. So if I go to Giant's Burden here and move myself out of the way, there we go. All right, so for all the large characters, they take 20% less damage from these weapons, some more damage from these weapons. It's interesting that they've left that weapon stuff in there because they've just not used it for anything else in the game. But I think this is the important part here, right? Gain plus 15% max health, plus 15% damage, and lose minus 10% speed. This is what makes Brute so slow. It makes Ironhide so slow, right? Even though they already have low speeds, this just makes it worse. So I think you should avoid putting glyphs on that have any speed at all if you can. Actually, let me move myself back over here. I have managed somehow to avoid putting any, I mean, this is the point of putting any speed on my brute. The reason I don't want to put speed on there is because any amount of speed I put on there, it's going to be reduced by 10%. So it's just less effective. Trying to get him to be faster is going to be much harder than just focusing on his other stats. Other stats which get bonuses because he's a large creature as well. So I think for large characters, instead of speed, you need to be focusing on HP and damage. Loading up brute with damage. Let's see, this is damage. That's focus, I guess. But loading up brute with that much damage, plus he then gets another 15%. Oh my god, he hits so hard. So that's kind of where I'm at with speed. All right, so let's go back to Bomber. I just love Bomber. I love his character design. I love him as a character. I love his kit. He helps me climb arena. He's so good in arena. Kind of gets through this Elrond stall meta that's still taking place. I'm testing out on my free-to-play account whether he's worth like super upgrading at 3 stars. I'm getting mixed results, but let's take a look at some other secondary stats here. I'm going to start with block mitigation and block chance. If we go back here, we should be able to see block mitigation 30, block chance 0. So characters that don't have block chance natively in their like kits, like their passives, like say Ugluk or Boromir, they have 0 basically block chance. And then block mitigation is 30. So what do these numbers mean? Block chance is essentially the chance you have to block. I don't think this is worth putting on anybody unless they already have it in their kit. Okay, block mitigation, what is that? I think one of the best ways I've seen to describe it is basically it's like the opposite of crit. It's essentially how much, when you do block, how much is that negating? So like when you crit, how much is that increasing? That's what crit damage is. It's kind of the opposite of crit damage. It's like how much does your block actually block? I think block mitigation serves more of a role than block chance. Ugluk might be the exception here, although even then you probably want both block chance and block mitigation. I like block mitigation for characters where they're going to be blocking a lot because there's a lot of defensive, like Rumel probably can get away with having a lot of block mitigation. I think that's pretty good. There's some tankiness stuff too. I think the Gondor team has really good stuff, you know, wants a lot of block chance, a lot of block mitigation to guarantee that they're getting that immunity. Outside of that, I don't know how useful these are, but I did want to start with this because I do think there's a little bit of confusion about what exactly these stats do. Let's talk next about crit chance and crit damage. Here's how I feel about crit chance and crit damage at the moment. So I have to admit to you that I have not completely mathed out exactly what's good for crit chance and crit damage. So currently, how I'm approaching it is I don't put crit chance and crit damage. I don't focus on crit chance and crit damage, I should say, on characters unless they already have something like that in their kit. So like Lomian, I will focus on crit chance and crit damage. I think Legolas, Orphan, these are all characters that you want a lot of crit chance, crit damage on. Probably Haradrim as well. I think those are good characters where that makes sense. The question I have in my mind that I don't know the math for is, you know, when should you be focusing on crit chance, crit damage? When should you be focusing on just straight damage? And I think you basically just have to run sort of the numbers. At level 5 glyphs, where you just have one secondary, I don't think you can get enough crit chance and crit damage to make up for it. But I don't know off the top of my head. Like I said, I haven't really run the numbers. I think if you get super like crit chance, crit damage focused glyphs, then that will definitely overtake just having damage. But I do right now like just having damage secondaries over crit chance, crit damage for a character that doesn't have any of that stuff built into their kit, just because I already know I'm able to get so much damage increase from the primaries. I'm just kind of adding on to that. So that's where I'm at with crit chance, crit damage. I put it on some characters. It's not my focus, though. The other thing is, it's different than damage in another way, which is that you need both crit chance and crit damage if you're going to put them on a character that just doesn't have any of that already in their kit, right? as opposed to damage, which you just need to put on damage. So I think I just would have to run the numbers, do some sort of like simulation type thing, and see how it turns out. Like I said, my gut instinct is that crit chance and crit damage, especially as you like spec into them more at higher glyph levels, will overtake just doing damage. But at just like level 5 glyphs, I think damage is totally fine. Focus and resistance, this is another case where they kind of complement each other, and you should just do kind of whatever you are doing for your primaries. So if like Thorn, for example, my Thorn is 5 stars, I put 2 focus primaries on him, I want to make sure that it gets his mark stuck on whoever I'm going for. Then I will also look for focus secondaries. Simple as that. If you're running some sort of resistance build on, let's say, Eladin, you should also probably have resistance in your secondaries. It's just, I don't know, kind of makes sense, right? They're just complementary. I think it's just kind of an additional way to boost up those numbers that you might already be boosting just because of the primaries you've put on there. The secondaries are such that, I've already mentioned this, but I want to say it again, especially for this part. If the secondary has a corresponding primary stat, so HP, armor, damage, focus, resistance, you're going to get more of that stat from putting a primary on than you are from like doing the secondary stuff. So don't worry about it too much. The way I'm kind of approaching things is, if I have a character, I usually I say, okay, I know definitely 1 secondary stat I want, probably 2 secondary stats that I'm like, these are important, maybe 3 and 4, but really, I definitely have 2 for pretty much every character that I'm like, these are good. What I do then is I go, okay, what of those 2, which of those do I think is the most useful? For Elrond, for example, I think HP is the most useful. I think focus is also really important to have. So then I just go through and I say, okay, I don't care about getting one glyph that has all 4 that might be good. I would care about getting a glyph that has at least 2 secondary stats that are pretty good. That's where I'm at right now. I'm going to upgrade those. Eventually down the line, once I kind of start to fill out my roster, I'll go back, take a look at Rivendell. I'll say, maybe it's time we gave Elrond that premium upgrade. I'll start to look for glyphs that have 3 of the stat that I want, that are, mostly built out, right? And just kind of work my way through that roster. I won't feel bad about upgrading the current glyphs I have. 1, because it's giving me more resources now, but 2, I can basically use them as hand-me-downs to, other characters down the line. I think that's totally okay. That's kind of my approach on secondaries. We can talk about HP and armor as well, but it's a lot of the same. Let's see, percent health, yeah. This is a good one to look at. Armor is 1 to 2%, HP is 0.5 to 1%. That makes sense because you do get so much more HP than you do armor, just in terms of raw stat values, I guess. Maybe that doesn't make sense. They are percents. I have to think about that a little bit more, but it's the same thing. They're complementary. So for healers, I'm going to try and max out HP. For my tanks, I'm trying to get somewhere between that 1 to 3,000 mark. 1,000 if they're HP focused, 3,000 if they're kind of more built up tanks. Those are, again, just the arbitrary numbers I've sort of laid out for me at this moment at level 60. But I think those are pretty decent values to kind of look at. And then damage, I think, is actually a really solid secondary. It's probably, I would say it's probably the top secondary to have. Maybe I'm going to get shit for this, but I think it's the top secondary to have because of how strong one particular set is, the Bloodlust set. Because you can get 90% turn meter by killing somebody, I think, even in raids, I think damage is probably the best secondary stat you can have. Yeah. So speaking of that, now I kind of want to lead you through some set first impressions. We're just going to go down the list here. You can see I put 3 Bloodlust on Bomber. He's so slow, right? I think this is good for a lot of large characters and just slow characters in general. He's so slow that, like, getting that 90% turn meter is so much more value compared to a fast character getting that 90% turn meter, right? If that makes sense. Because it would take him so much longer to get 90% turn meter than a fast character, I think Bloodlust is essentially more effective on somebody like him. Okay. I guess we'll start with Bloodlust. This is just the best set. I think this is a really good default. Both Last Stand and Bloodlust are really good defaults. AP Gaines had this video when Glyphs initially came out, and he was basically like, I'm just going to tell you right now, it's Last Stand and Bloodlust. And I was a little hesitant at first. I was like, I don't know, but I think he is correct. This is a good default, is Last Stand and Bloodlust. The issue with Last Stand, maybe I'll talk about that when I get to Last Stand, but I actually think 3 times Bloodlust is even just a good default. Even in raids. Somebody asked me this while I was live streaming the other day. You know, chapter 2, chapter 4, do you really want to make sure? Chapter 1, you don't want to kill the orcs. Chapter 2, you've got the cave troll, he summons 2 orcs. Chapter 3, are you really killing orcs? And chapter 4, there's no summons, so Bloodlust doesn't trigger. Is Bloodlust still useful for raids? And the answer is yes. So let me explain why. Chapter 1, yes, you don't want your characters to be killing orcs, but it gives you a lot of flexibility. And so the example I was using was with Aemir. I was doing like a 9, just a difficulty 3 run with my Rohan team. And I happened to have 3 times Bloodlust on Aemir. Am I trying to take out the orcs with Aemir? No. But what it does do is it gives me the flexibility. If I can kill somebody and I need to kill somebody, I can basically go again with Aemir, and that means I can get 1 more stamina into my summon. My summon was just killed or whatnot, and that's going to bring back some abilities that were going to let me be more efficient at killing the bomber. So it just gives me a lot of flexibility in that way. It gives me more options while I'm playing in Chapter 1. It's not my goal, but it just gives me a little bit more freedom. Chapter 2. I think having Bloodlust on your characters in Chapter 2 is totally fine. The majority, maybe not the, I think it is the majority of your points in Chapter 2, or at least a big chunk of your points in Chapter 2 come from making sure you go from 25% to, 0% on the cave troll once he's toppled, right? I think that is a good time to have Bloodlust, because you can essentially take care of the ads on the side, the orcs that get spawned in, not have to worry about them throwing a wrench in your plans. And then you still get the turn meter back to then go back onto the cave troll. So I think it just, again, it gives you a little bit of freedom and some options there. Chapter 3. Well, this is the second time I'm going to mention this video. I have a Chapter 3 cheese video, and it is cheesy. Let me tell you, it is that Wisconsin grade cheese. You can essentially use Bloodlust, 3 times Bloodlust on a number of characters and get 900k points in Chapter 3 very easily. I do it with my Rohan team with the Ironhide. I do it with my Dol Guldur team, with some other characters in there. Sometimes I think I throw Brute in there with the Dol Guldur. And I'm just able to go so fast that I can essentially kill all the other orcs before they can go again. It's very, very useful. Doesn't work in difficulty 4, but I don't have a lot of teams that are like maxing out difficulty 3 normally with Chapter 3. This is a way to get there. So 3 chapters, I think Bloodlust is really good. Chapter 4, you got me. Bloodlust does not work. Am I going to swap out Glyphs for just for Chapter 4? No, I'm not. But 3 out of 4 chapters is pretty good, right? So while we're on Aemir, let's talk, because I know Bloodlust is the big one here. Oh, I'm going to save that one. Let's talk about Last Stand. I think this is also a really good default. The issue with Last Stand is that basically in difficulty 4, you can kind of get 1 hit from like above, like if you're at 26% health and you can get hit to below that and just die, right? And then this Last Stand doesn't trigger. However, I do think it works a decent amount of the time. I put it on like some of my healers. Naramiri, I think is a good example for having Last Stand. I think it works okay, decently well on characters that I want to make sure live longer and that maybe are a little bit squishy. If your characters are too squishy, maybe they shouldn't be at that difficulty where they're getting essentially 1 hit from that percentage of health, but I do think it plays a role. I have changed my opinion. I do not think Last Stand is the best set to use for Chapter 3. I've changed it to Bloodlust. Although Last Stand is very good. So Again, if you've got like maybe a support or healer or tank type character, maybe an off tank type character, and you're not really sure what to use, I think Last Stand plus a Bloodlust is pretty good. If they're more of a support, bruiser, DPS, I think 3 times Bloodlust is a pretty good option as well. And then I think the other sets mostly have some use. There's some that don't, and I want to talk about those as well. Okay, gonna leave Armor Piercer for last. Lembas. I think this is great for characters that don't start off with full stamina on some of their skills and then have long cooldowns. I think there's very specific examples that you want to put Lembas on. Elrond is one of them. I actually like Lembas on Eowyn, so I can start off with her special 2 because it's got this disable and it's a cleanse, and I think that's very useful in raids. T-Beb is another good example of somebody with Lembas that works well. I think Mary is probably a good example for Lembas. Let me back up. Lembas is different than how they originally pitched it on the news article on the website. It now only grants 2 stamina. So it's 1 stamina at the start of the encounter. So it'll fill up whatever you have that's not full. So for Elrond, right, you fill up his wave so you can use it turn 1. And then once you use 1 ability that has stamina, you can then fill it up again. Maybe you could do it on a basic as well. I actually don't know. So like if you have an ability that starts like 2 stamina down and you put Lembas on there, and the first turn you use a basic, does it go into that? Maybe that wouldn't matter anyway, because you'd be getting a stamina next turn. Anyway, I think this has some great niche cases and is relatively strong for those particular characters. I think it's pretty obvious which characters they go on. I just named like 3 of them. Other than that, I don't think it's like a generally useful, outside of like that specific use case. Yeah, you're not going to use it. Okay, let's talk about Lifestealer. This is useless. Do not use Lifestealer. It's just not worth it. Even if you have like a character that's doing a lot of damage to like everybody on a team. I want to do an example. Okay, I wrote down an example, so let me just read my example basically. If we take Elodin, right? And let's say the other team has 6 characters. We take our Elodin, we do a special 2, we do a spin to win helicopter. And let's say he does something absurd like 7,000 damage on each character. That's about 42,000 total damage. And if you had a full set of lifesteal, what is that? 42,000 times 6% is about 2,500. I have about 48,000 health on my Elodin. And with that much damage on the other team, I would get just that little of... It's just not worth it. I think this is actually a set that they will have to revisit and probably boost, because even characters that already have some lifesteal built into their kit, like let's say Black Beast or the Dunlending team, I just don't think this is enough to... I would much rather use Bloodlust. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Don't use Lifestealer. It is the worst Glyph set currently. Let's talk about Raider. I don't like Raider because of this condition of 50% health, 2% more damage. I think a lot of people... I'm going to leave it at that for now and then come back to that when we talk about Armor Piercer. But I don't like the conditional. 2% is not enough for this condition. Let's talk about Shield Wall. I think Shield Wall is actually a really good set for certain niche characters. It's not a default set, but I think it's pretty decent for certain characters. Characters that have taunt or provoke up quite a bit. So characters that have taunt that are very slow. So I think Grimpa, Fro, great examples. And then characters that have provoke up all the time. So somebody like Elodin, I think is great to have Shield Wall on because, again, just looking at the team that he's always playing in with Rivendell, right? I just want to get that damage reduction because he's already got a lot of HP. And then Elrond is able to heal him up more of his HP. A greater percentage of his HP is the way I should be phrasing it. And then basically, he's just harder to get through. I think it's great sets for those. If you have a character like Ugluk, let's say, where he's provoking on his basic some of the time, he's often provoking. I don't know if this is worth it as opposed to doing something like Withering or Vitality as a major set and then putting Bloodlust as the minor set. I don't think the 3% less damage is really worth it in that case. I'm not convinced. But I do think it has its niche for like the tankier characters, especially the slow ones that have taunt. Vitality, I do think Vitality, again, is niche and has some use cases. It's obviously not a default. A lot less of a default than I initially assumed. I do put it on, I think I have it on like Ethane, and I want to put it on Ugluk. I don't have it on Ugluk currently, but just giving a little bit of sustain to teams that just don't have a massive amount of healing, or like a very good healer. Like Isengard, Dunhar is not a good healer. I don't use Aldred with Rohan, and if I do Halbarad, his heal is not that great considering how often he gets it and how fast he is. So I just like to kind of, Aemir can heal himself and Eowyn, and so Ethane needs to just, do it himself, basically. So I think that's a decent option there. Again, I'm just going to link that spreadsheet where I'm going to have all the glyphs on the characters I currently use down below. You can see what I use Vitality on. It comes up decently, but it's definitely not like a default, or something that's in the running to be a default, I should say. And then Withering. Withering is currently broken for some characters. I've seen that it basically damages Haradrim some. I don't think it's happening to other characters, but definitely Haradrim. And it might just be some of the Haradrim. You deal 15% true damage. Where I'm at on Withering, I currently have it on all my Isengard, which I think is okay for now, but I think later on I might want to change that. I think it's okay for now because I only use Isengard for like chapter 2 of the raid, really. And in that case, it's okay because you're worried about the armor increases from Enrage on the Cave Troll, and you're just able to, land a little bit more damage. You do have to land the Banes, which is also harder, but I think it works okay there. I think Withering is really good on characters that have AoE Banes and high damage stat, because you do need to do 15% of their high damage stat. So like, look at this damage on Aemir. Aemir's got a lot of damage, right? 3,500. What is 15% of 3,500? 525. Is that good? I mean, obviously you're not going to put it on Aemir. I don't know. It doesn't seem that compelling to me at the moment. I do think it will eventually become like its own niche set. I think especially for PvP, it will be pretty good. And I think there are probably future boss battles where it's like, yeah, if we have Smaug and he has unpenetrable armor, then you landing Banes and then using a Withering set might be a good way to overcome that. Cave Troll is a good example of that. I think that's a decent way to use Withering. But like putting Withering on Dunhar, right? Let's look at how much damage he has. Seven-star G8 Dunhar. And he's got 2,300 damage. That's an additional 345 damage. I guess it's fine, but like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem that great to me. I do think it's a good bone that they threw to shadow squads, which do focus on it. But like, I think good contenders, really good contenders for, probably the best contender for Withering is like Rachma, who has some AoE Bane, and very high damage. I think Golbers maybe is another good option there, just stacking the damage on top of his bleeds, and he's got relatively okay damage in general. I think those are probably really good candidates for Withering. Isengard, sure. Again, it really depends on what you use them for. If I'm trying to use them in other chapters, I think it makes less sense, and I would much prefer to have sustain from Vitality than I would just to have that extra damage. But that's probably something I'm kind of testing and I'm kind of on the fence about. I could see it either way, basically. All right, let's talk about Armor Piercer. I am in the camp that I think Armor Piercer is good. Let me switch to desktop here. And I've got another spreadsheet for you. Okay, so again, this is based on the armor formula that was basically derived by Yari. Shout out to them. And what I have over here is I've just essentially calculated armor and then how much armor piercer, like, or how much that armor is reducing the incoming amount of damage. And then if that person has armor piercer, if the person being attacked is being attacked by somebody with armor piercer, how much does that damage then sort of get reduced by? Essentially, you can look at this plot, and I think that will better explain it. All right, can you see that? I think you can. Okay, so I have 2% armor piercing, 4% armor piercing, and 6% armor piercing compared to 0% armor piercing, so no armor piercer at all. And you can see that it depends on the armor of the target you're attacking. Cave Troll, difficulty 3 is about 3050 armor. Again, I don't remember, it's like 3100 or 3300 for difficulties 4 and 5. You can see that for 6% armor piercing, you're getting around 4% increase in damage against that particular target. That's why I think armor piercing is pretty good. I've put it on Elra here, and I've put it on Legolas, and I've put it on Healy, because those are the damage dealers that I really want to hit hard against certain targets, like the Cave Troll, like the Balrog. The Balrog does have less armor. Obviously, armor piercer does less if you are, if the target has less armor. But I think you can kind of make up for it by just really pumping up your damage, primaries and secondaries, and then you're just hitting hard either way. So I think armor piercer is currently worth it. 4% additional damage compared to no armor piercing, I think is good. And I want to put this back in the context of Raider. So I think you could this is 2% more damage against enemies with more than 50% health. So 6% total damage, right? But they have to be above 50%. I think you could make the argument, at least in my head, I made the argument well, if you're fighting the Cave Troll and that's what you're really worried about, right? You stop at 25% anyway, and then he gets toppled. So the time you spend under 50% is actually not as much. To which my counter argument, again, all happening inside of my head, I don't know what that says about me, is yeah, true, but at the same time, what you actually really care about, again, to get the majority and chunk of those points, is making sure that once he is toppled, you finish him off. And then that moment, which is often very tense and I don't know, difficult to navigate, especially with the 2 orcs coming in, depending on what the orcs are, is you're just suddenly not going to have any of your set bonuses from your raider. So I think right now I prefer AP to raider, armor piercer to raider in pretty much all circumstances. And it's probably the second most useless glyph in my mind, if that makes sense. I think armor piercer makes things, people hit harder. Even outside of the raid, I think people are starting to spec armor into some of their tanks. And I think that helps really chew through, let's say, a really beefy Eladin. And even if they don't have a lot of armor, if you spec into damage, then you're just hitting really, really hard either way. It seems pretty good to me so far. I think my opinions on this can change. I know a lot of people who are maybe more arena focused. I know one person in particular who is maybe more arena focused, who just doesn't care about any of that and wants to go full bloodlust. That's fine. I think AP is pretty decent. An extra 4% damage for the Cave Troll all the time, I think that's pretty good. And then it gets more effective on the higher difficulties, and as he's getting in rage stacks. That's kind of what I want. That's kind of what I want out of my damage dealers in the raid. So that's why I use armor piercer. Okay. So at this point, yeah, I want to reiterate. I think my default options are 3 times Bloodlust and Last Stand plus Bloodlust. That's where I'm at in terms of sets. Don't use Lifestealer. Don't use Raider. That's everything else kind of has some niche uses, but I think that's sort of my summary of the whole thing. So now I kind of want to talk a little bit about Arena. Where I'm at on Arena is speed appears to be more important for tuning turns. Again, you want to make sure that your Arwen is able to cleanse the first turn wave that pretty much all Elrons run now. And so I think it's more important there. Again, I think resistance is a little bit more important there. But overall, I think the thing you really should be focusing on for Arena is just like getting your primary stats up, getting your glyph levels up. And that way your primary stats are higher and then your characters are just beefier. So glyph level, gear, because that's tied to glyph level, regular level and stars, those go together, and then skill abilities. And each one of those is kind of like a big piece of the pyramid. It's a three-legged stool. And you got skills, glyphs, and gear level, and then levels and stars. And I think they're starting to become more equal, although I think levels and stars definitely is the biggest of the legs. And then maybe the other two are a little bit more equal. In terms of Arena, I guess I don't have a lot to add. I think it'll become way more important in multi-squad PvP, and there becomes like, this is a really good defensive team. You're pretty much going to always have this on defense. And then you're going to have specific glyphs for that team for defense. And the same is going to be the case for offensive teams. And so we're going to revisit that when that feature comes out, hopefully sooner rather than later. Yeah, I guess the only thing I really want to add is that speed does become more important in Arena. And I think resistance is a viable strategy, but maybe not so much so that you want to mess up your raid scores at the moment, if that makes sense. Okay, so now I want to talk about upgrading glyphs, and I've told you a little bit about, I think you should basically get to level 5, because I think the gold cost is fine, you don't have to use scrolls, but anything past that, you have to use scrolls, right? And I'm just not... I think we all knew that scrolls were going to be the bottleneck. The way you get them is obviously in the guild chests here. So we get guild chest 4 typically, which I know is not necessarily normal, but comes with 50 scrolls there. I think guild chest 3 is also 50 of these enchantment scrolls. Enchantment scrolls, these sword ones, I think are the ones that basically bottleneck me. Like I have 0 of them. Whereas these other ones I have a decent number of, like the illusion scrolls. Let me show you something very quickly in case you aren't aware of it. I just want to make sure you do end up seeing it. Down here in the raid store, just for gold, regular gold mithril, or raid coins rather, regular gold mithril, regular raid coins, the gold ones, you scroll basically all the way to the bottom here, you can buy these illusion scrolls for 60, 2 of them for 60. I think it's worth getting a little stockpile of these, even if you don't have any G9 characters. I do this on my free-to-play account, and I don't have any G9 characters on my free-to-play account. I think it's worth getting just a little bit of stockpile of these. You need, like, what, 4 to go from 8 to 9, I believe, and 8 to go from 9 to 10. So you can't use them until you get to G9 and G10 on your characters, but I think, yeah, just give yourself a little bit of a stockpile, because those are harder to get than some of your other, these enchantment scrolls, which you just need a lot more of. So the way you get them, obviously through the guild boxes, but also through the personal reward track here. They kind of start off, yeah, right around here. You get them pretty early. I like that they didn't replace the rewards, but they just added in extra ones with these scrolls, right? Let me switch views here and I'll show you. This is a spreadsheet, a lot of spreadsheet heavy video, I guess. Has the raid rewards over here, the cumulative raid rewards. And I've kind of mapped them all out. If you get to like max raid rewards, you get 162 of those enchantment, the sword scrolls, 16 of the illusion or those green ones, and then 7 of the whatever the other ones are that are only for G9 to G10 or level 9 to level 10. So not a lot there. I think, again, I'm just going to focus on the enchantment scrolls here. I've done kind of an estimation using my 2 accounts. So on my main account, I've got my raid points here, like what I typically score. I think this was basically just last raid. And then how many enchantment scrolls I get from the personal track, and then at the end, what I get from my guild box. And so total, I actually get 312 enchantment scrolls on my main account, 180 those still on my free-to-play account. I've found that I've got a decent number of scrolls on my free-to-play account. I want to be a little bit pickier in who I am, or what glyphs I'm upgrading, and who I'm putting them on. Whereas with my main account, I'm out because I am spent all of them like the first raid and a half, the first like 2 raids, just trying to get my primaries up and just like get glyphs on my characters so I could, 1, make content, see if I could push further into the raids as well. And now I feel like I have to go back and redo some of my glyphs because I upgraded ones that were not so great. The 312, if we take a look at this table, which was made by Rimble, shout out to him, it tells you sort of how many spells you need to go from certain levels. I like stopping at 8. So going to level 8, I need 28 of these enchantment scrolls. And I have 312 that I get from raids on my main account. So if I do 312 divided by 28, it's 11 glyphs I can take from 5 to 8. So basically just shy of 2 characters a week. And that is on my main account. And in a good guild where we're getting box 4, you know, 180 even on my free-to-play account, I think is pretty good because a good chunk of them, almost a third, comes from box 4 here. Although you can get it in box 3, you get 50 as well. I think most people are probably going to be sitting around the like 75 to 200 mark, especially if you're a free-to-play player. I think somewhere in there, right? So you're looking at like 1 character's glyphs you can sort of max a week. Or sorry, not even max, get to level 8 in a week. I think level 8's a fine stopping point. It seems very slow to me. That seems too slow to me. I'm going to be honest with you. I think this is a big bottleneck. So what I'm going to suggest is that the thing that I'll tell you what I've started doing, which is I only upgrade glyphs that have at least 2 of the secondaries I'm looking for. And again, they're at least 3 basically of the secondary stats are like furthest to the right. That kind of method I was talking about before. It's better if I just show you, isn't it? Those are typically the kind of the glyphs I want to spend my resources upgrading because you do get bottlenecked so heavily by this particular one. So I think this is like a decent glyph. It's got almost max armor, decent HP, okay focus. Block mitigation is up there, but not maybe something. I mean, he's fine. He's a tank, right? So this is maybe one I would consider upgrading as well. Just being a little bit pickier and choosier about that because I found that on my main account, I've had to go back and like upgrade glyphs that are good and replace the ones that I had that were kind of bad. So just be careful when you go past level 5 about what you're choosing to upgrade. Make sure it's something that you do want to put resources into. Basically, my conclusion is that the stats you get from increasing your primaries don't outweigh the bad, like the rate at which you're getting the scrolls. And so if you're upgrading bad glyphs, you're gonna have to spend more time re-upgrading good glyphs, you know, down the line, as opposed to just like getting to that higher level and then that just gives you more glyphs that or gives you more scrolls that you can then use to sort of get better glyphs. I think it doesn't work out like that. I think it's basically you just should be focusing on upgrading good glyphs and not bad glyphs, even if it's going to give you that temporary stat boost for the primaries. I'm not sure that's a good trade-off, is what I've found. That's kind of my shtick on the scrolls. They're really, this will be the next big bottleneck, which is weird because we haven't really gotten any relief on some of the other bottlenecks. I mean, gold a while ago, but even then that's now pretty scarce. I've got 76k on my main account, right? So just be wary of that. I think that's pretty much all I want to cover in this glyph basics video. One of the next videos I want to make is basically a how to glyph your free-to-play account. Make that sort of a focus of a video. Kind of what my strategies are on my free-to-play account. Not that it's super optimal, but just kind of lead you through some of my thinking, what I'm trying out. Do that sort of thing. But I think that's all for this. Let me know what you think down in the comments or if you have any questions. Again, I'm going to post links to some of those resources down below, but they'll also be in my Discord. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.